What's going on, ACC football family? It is your favorite North Carolinian, Russ, the Tar Heel, and we are officially finished with the ACC slate in week 0. And wouldn't you know, your boy started off the season 2-0 straight up as Georgia Tech stung the Noles in Dublin and SMU gets a stinking comeback win against Nevada all the way out in stinking Reno. That is 100% accuracy in 2024. Not too shabby, I might add.
You don't want none! You don't want none!
Now, the question is can I keep 100% for the remainder of the season? Highly unlikely. But before we get into this week in the ACC, do me a stinking favor, man. YouTube is telling me that 40 to 50% of the watchers of the Huddle are subscribed to the channel, but for some reason we're often getting less than 10% of those watchers liking the video. So I don't know. Is it just me? Do me a favor after the video. If you actually liked it and you appreciate all the time and effort that goes into the content, hit the stinking like button for me. Help your boy out, help the algorithm, and let other people know that we're in here, dude. Tar Heel Nation is in here. So let's start off with the Jackets taking down the defending Atlantic Coast Conference champion Florida State in Dublin, 24-21. And as some of you may have remembered, your boy predicted Georgia Tech 27-24. So I almost hit this thing on the stinking head. And what did I say? I said one of the reasons was it's a weird football game, bro. It's a weird thing, a football game. Georgia Tech has improved. The game's out in Ireland. I'm not a big fan of DJU. There was question marks on, all the offensive production that Florida State was going to have to stink and replace. So let's see how my guy DJU did. 19 for 27, 193 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. 6 carries for 7 yards and 0 touchdowns. Not one stinking touchdown against one of the worst defenses in the entire country in 2023. Like I said, man, what did I say? They're replacing everyone. And the truth of the matter of the fact is, it sure stinking looked like it, man. Not just like, hey, this is our first time playing football together. We have to, kind of gel and get things figured out. No, it was more like, where in the world did all the talent go on the offense? I mean, especially on the stinking offensive side of the football. And, correct me if I'm wrong, man. Is it just me? Or did FSU look extremely boring, like lacking playmaker type boring? They've got a lot to fix on that side of the football, man. And, because I think you saw an offense that could struggle to find a dude that they can lean on for offensive production, who knows if this is the end of the woes. Now, Tech held FSU to 291 yards of total offense. And remember, like I said, man, this is one of the worst defenses in the country last year. 193 yards passing and only 98 yards rushing. And you remember, because Georgia Tech struggled to stop the run last year, I said that Florida State's key was to establish the run. Yeah, they didn't do that. So on the other side of the football, Georgia Tech seemed completely okay with just ramming the ball down FSU's throat behind that big offensive line. Now, all week we've heard about how good Florida State's front seven is, right? What did Georgia Tech do? 190 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns. Now, Jamal Haynes, who I'm super big on, had 11 carries for 75 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Georgia Tech also used Haynes King multiple times, enabling them to get an extra blocker downhill, man. So, they weren't necessarily as proficient in the passing game as I kind of expected them to be. But I'm going to tell you what impressed me about Georgia Tech's win, man. And this is the very thing that should make other teams in the conference wake up and start really keeping their eyes on the Yellow Jackets. There are often times where coaches get too cute. We've seen this at Carolina. And they're more concerned with looking pretty as opposed to what's effective. And you saw Brent Key and that Georgia Tech offensive game plan do exactly what needed to be done to win this football game. Use that big offensive line and lean on the Noles. They said, hey, our good is better than your good. And that was a stinking statement game for Brent Key. And quite honestly, man, he just injected a ton of juice into that stinking fan base in that program. It wasn't always pretty. It wasn't always pretty, but who stinking cares, man? Now you have a top 10 win over the defending Atlantic Coast Conference champions in Dublin, Ireland, under your belt. That's going to be a huge selling point for recruits. It's a big W for the Jackets. And I would say that the University of North Carolina, as a Tar Heel fan, needs to take a page out of that book, because I think Carolina should have a similar mindset and mentality. Dude, I'm telling you, watch out for the Jackets. And that game in Chapel Hill just got a lot more exciting, if you stinking ask me. Now, moving on to SMU, making his debut game as part of the ACC out in Reno. Dude, they almost not only embarrassed themselves, but the very conference that they're now a part of. SMU scores 16 points in the fourth to win the game 29-24. I think it was like a 27.5 point spread at kick. Now, I picked this game 37-20 SMU, largely in part due to Nevada being picked last in the Mountain West Conference. And remember, this is that SMU team that everybody is saying is some type of dark horse in the Atlantic Coast Conference to come in here and just take over like they own things. Well, I don't think you saw that at all in week stinking 0, man. I was really surprised at the lack of effectiveness from Preston Stone, especially in the first 3 quarters of that football game, man. He only went 17 for 30 for 254 yards, a touchdown and an interception. And then his backup, which is kind of like a little bit of a battle, if you will, he went 4 for 5 for 54 yards himself. The Mustangs were only able to muster 100 yards on the ground despite having 2 rushing touchdowns. Now, the bright spot, however, was they got RJ stinking Maryland. 8 receptions, 162 yards, and a touchdown. This kid is 6'4", 233 pounds, so he's a huge target. And like I said, they don't lack for necessarily talent at the skill positions. The question is the trenches. And when Nevada holds you to less than 100 yards rushing, maybe a little question mark right there for old SMU faithful, man. Now, the defense held Nevada to under 300 yards of total offense, 298 to be exact. But I think that's to be expected against the team picked to finish last in a non-Power 4 conference. So it'll be really interesting to watch how this SMU team grows after this one. Is this just kind of a fluke? Were they not stinking hyped? I don't know how you're not hyped in week 0. But they got another cupcake next week in Houston Christian, which is even more of a cupcake than Nevada on deck. So they got plenty of time to stinking work out the kinks. So those are the only 2 ACC-involved football games in week 0. So moving on to the current ACC standings, look at that. Georgia Tech at the top, 1-0 in the stinking conference, bro. SMU moves to 1-0. Obviously, they have a non-con win now. And then this is still mind-boggling to me. Florida State, right there at the bottom. At the very bottom, 0-1 in the conference. And I can't help but chuckle and to a certain extent feel sorry for a lot of Seminole fans, because I know the pain of having to wait 7 days and looking at that and what it does to your stinking heart and soul. So there it is, Florida State all the way at the bottom of the Atlantic Coast Conference. So looking ahead to next week, we got 3 stinking days of football, man. So ton to be excited about in week 1. Thursday night, August 29th, Western Carolina at number 24, NC State. You got North Carolina A&T at Wake Forest. You got our boys in Carolina Blue, North Carolina at Minnesota, in Big Ten country. And then hopefully we're waking up Friday feeling stinking fantastic about ourselves. And then we get to watch Elon take on Duke, and then TCU at Stanford, 10:30 p.m. ESPN time. This is the crappy thing about all these West Coast teams now, which fortunately Stanford doesn't seem to be a team that's going to be, necessarily in the thick of things. You kind of got to wait until late at night or early in the morning to find out, the outcome of some of these football games. And then obviously August 31st, you got some stinking barn burners, man, all starting off with number 14 Clemson taking on the number 1 Georgia Bulldogs at noon on ABC. Then you got Virginia Tech at Vanderbilt at noon, Austin Peay at Louisville at noon, Kent State at Pittsburgh, number 19 Miami at Florida. That's an interesting to keep an eye on. Ohio at Syracuse, UC Davis at Cal, Richmond at Virginia, Georgia State at Georgia Tech. Be interesting to see if Georgia Tech maybe falls asleep. They shouldn't, because these are their, crosstown rivals, kind of, if you will. Then you got, like I said, Houston Christian at SMU and Boston College at Florida State. Man, I kind of hate to be Boston College right now, man. They get to go to stinking Tallahassee and possibly get the revenge of a pissed-off Florida State team. So, like I said, 2 games, baby, and your boy is stinking 2-0.
Perfect.
So next week, though, things will ramp up. It's kind of like being at the top of a roller coaster. Get your hands up, baby, because here we go. All right, man, I'll catch you on the next one.